Welcome to the Mindset Meets Money podcast, where money makes sense.
Dr. Heller.
Yes, sir.
I decided to go with the professor look today to try to keep up with your stature and your education level.
Do you have the patches?
I figured, I don't.
We got to get you. We got to get you one.
You know what? That'll be the next sport coat I bring in for our next episode of that side.
I love it.
Yeah,
I'll be wearing the same shirt.
If I don't want to take the schooling that you took, I can at least do the look.
There you go.
I need to get my beard back to being bigger too.
You'll get there.
All right, what bias are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about status quo bias. So status quo bias is our preference for keeping things the same, and it stems out of a fear of the decision you make to change things being the wrong decision.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, so you inherit money, whether it's from parents,
life's good,
whatever it is, right? Yep. But it's not cash. It comes in securities. It comes in a rental property, whatever it is. Okay, what are the odds that the concentrated security portfolio? Grandma liked Home Depot, so she always bought Home Depot. She ends up with this gigantic Home Depot position and ships it to you. Again, nothing wrong with Home Depot. I'm only using because I've actually gone through this recently with clients. Home Depot may or may not be a great position for you, but most people will sit on it. Why? It was grandma's.
This is an interesting one because when I was in practice, I ran into this with clients all the time, especially up in the Northeast, that you had people that worked for large companies and they got stock options or they just bought into one company. GE was a great example that I ran into all the time in the early 2000s, especially during that time where it was, I think it was like 5% of the GDP of all of the U.S. back then. And so you would have people that felt this loyalty to companies, even with the grandparents that they inherited to, that they didn't want to sell. Or it was their first stock and it, did a 5X or a 10X for them early on. And they really felt like that's the company that they wanted to have. And they had they never wanted to change it. To your point, it was status quo. There was something that made them feel very comfortable with that investment. And they didn't want to make any decisions contrary to that. So this status quo piece, does it usually happen with individual securities? Does it happen with, just a total balanced portfolio? What do you typically see the status quo bias in practice?
So we'll see it a lot in inheritance. We'll also see it a lot in the inertia around qualified plan, the opening of a qualified plan. So employer-sponsored 401k. They have auto enrollment nowadays, right? Where you don't even have to sign up. You get a new contract. So
I start working for a company. They automatically put me in the 401k and put in 5% in.
Automatically put anywhere 3 to 5% of your salary. You have to opt out.
Yep.
Okay, so
which is honestly one of the greatest things, by the way, because the amount of clients I had to convince to start saving in their 401k to get free money when they had a free match.
Yep.
And they didn't sign up right away.
It has increased the overall savings rate in retirement plans dramatically.
Great example of Congress actually doing something well and creating that ability to do that. Yeah.
It's called the Save More Tomorrow plan. And in some cases, they actually increase without... you know about it, but you're not. You
have to opt out of it, opposed to opt in.
Out. So that's the concept of status quo is inertia, right?
Yep.
You have to actually take action to get out of it. Okay, so
which is a good example. So people get pay raises. Your expenses don't go up. It might be still the same 5%, but you might be able to save 8%.
Right.
And people don't make that decision to increase from a 5% to an 8% or 10% savings rate.
Right. And since you're not actually writing the check, it's coming out of your paycheck. It's not salient. You're really not seeing the difference.
Yep.
Writing a check every week to put into your 401k is
that'd be uncomfortable.
Emotionally difficult. Right? Exactly, right? But if it drips out, it's not even, you don't even think about it, right? That's the beauty of those type of plans. So again, a lot of the biases that we'll talk about are double-edged swords, right? They can be used for good and they can be used for bad. The good on status quo is it's inertia, right? Think of those auto enrollment plans. Well, you have to actually act to be unenrolled in it. You have to act to stop the increase in your deferral amounts year after year.
So that's an example of a good one.
That's an example of a good one. An example of a bad one, same scenario. A lot of those people end up in the default investments. And so the default investments tend to be cash, or they tend to be a target date fund that is closely aligned to their age and then age 65.
I am shocked when clients come in and they show me a 401k statement and it's all sitting in cash for money that's 20, 30 years out because it was the default statement and they didn't want to change anything. It was just status quo.
Yep. So again, pluses and minuses for it. So the idea here, as with all the biases we talk about, is not to completely try to eliminate them, because you're not going to be able to eliminate them. It's to harness the understanding of them and to combat them when they need to be combated. And so status quo, you receive that inheritance. You have to evaluate what you're picking up. You just can't trust that what grandpa or grandma did was the right thing for you going forward. What they did 40, 50 years ago and just held on to for forever probably wasn't the right thing for them over that 50-year period of time, and it more than likely isn't the right thing for you.
So let's go through the questions we always ask as we go through these biases. Is how do you know if you're being affected by the status quo bias?
Okay, so just the inability, your complete lack of desire to make any adjustments or changes, regardless of how much sense they may make.
So this could be confused with an underconfidence bias,
Correct.
where you're actually not confident
They're
in making
all
the right
interconnected.
decision, so you're stuck in doing it. But it also could be that you're confident of just staying in the same thing because you're very comfortable with the status quo.
Exactly.
So an example would be is or you acknowledge me, is you've done something for a long period of time and you're not changing. Mm-hmm. And so and this is, I think, it's a good filter to use sometimes, is making a decision of inaction is still a decision.
Yes.
And then sometimes we're not even realizing we're making the decision to keep the status quo.
Right.
So if you have an investment that you're keeping that the investment is the same for a while, you have to ask yourself, are you choosing that investment to stay the same because it's the right for your portfolio, or are you choosing it because you're being affected by the status quo bias? Meaning you're just cool with the status quo and you just want to keep things how it is.
Right. I love the way you frame that, because the reason people sit and allow status quo to grip them is because they have a fear of making a change, because the change is their decision, right? So the default fund was picked for you. You now choose to invest in a different fund, and if it doesn't work out, the mistake was made by you, right? You stick in the status quo, the default fund that was picked for you, and it doesn't work out. It wasn't your fault. You didn't pick it. Somebody else picked it for you, right? But the way you just framed it is exactly how you should look at it. Indecision is a decision, right? So if you turn around and decide, well, I'm going to stay status quo and I'm not going to move out of that default fund, that was your choice. You have now owned that decision to stay in that fund. If that fund doesn't work out, it's not someone else's fault. It's your fault for making the decision to be indecisive there. Yep,
that makes complete sense. And so, examples of this that you want to think about are, and I love, the first one is default funds. So whether it's an inheritance and you were defaulted with those existing investments that came over, you deciding to stay in those investments, taking in all tax consequences and everything associated with that, you deciding to stay in those investments is a decision you're making that you should own on your own, and you want to be able to choose that one. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with the default from a 401k. You have an investment in a 401k associated with it. Or it could be a portfolio that you put together with another financial advisor that gave you advice, or you chose the investments early on, and maybe it was your first stock that did really well for yours, and now it's taken up 10% of your portfolio because it did really well, and you don't want to sell any of it because it's the first stock that did well for your investments, and you kind of want to stick with it and keep riding it, even though it's has a much bigger holding level than you want of your overall percentage of your portfolio. So, you can identify a number of these examples. If you're sitting there and you realize that you're making a decision because you're kind of pretty comfortable with the status quo, what do you do? Now all of a sudden I realize I kind of want to keep my mom's Home Depot stock that, she bought because, my dad always loved shopping at Home Depot and it did really well for them.
Right.
How do I get over that?
Right. And by the way, we're using Home Depot purely as an example here. We're not.
Yeah, we do a good job of running with one example the whole time.
Right.
What everyone brings up, than opposed to doing multiple examples on here.
Right.
But zero recommendations around Home Depot.
So what do you do when you find yourself kind of stuck in this indecisive? You're not willing to make the decision. So a lot of these, if you listen to enough of these episodes together, you'll see this common thread, right? Where education will help push you past a lot of these issues. If you're unwilling or unable to do it yourself, you got to engage a professional, right? 30 years ago, there was this gigantic asymmetry in terms of informational asymmetry between professionals and amateurs. That's not the case anymore, right? And so...
what do you mean by asymmetry for us that are not professors and well-read and don't have a vocabulary game we play every day?
Thank you. 30 years ago, information on the financial metrics of a company were really only made available to those that were professionals, right? The average person on the street couldn't tell you what the PE of Home Depot is.
Yep.
Right now, if you ask that and the person knew to go to Yahoo Finance, look it up, it's right there. Anybody could tell you, right? That wasn't available 30, 40 years ago. It is now. So there's plenty of avenues to educate yourself. Now, if you find yourself like most professionals who don't have the time to do a lot of that work, that's when you go and you hire a professional. I always use the example. I physically can build the deck in my backyard if I wanted to. I'm physically capable.
Are you really thinking about a deck? Because you've brought this up on other episodes too.
No, I keep using the same example.
I gotcha.
Right?
You just go with the analogy over and over.
No, we had a guy do it because I don't have the time to go do it, right? I can do the math. I can cut the lumber. I can do all that stuff, but I don't have the time to do it, and so nor did the inclination to. So
you're a big dude with a lot of gray in your beard and hair. I feel like you look like a builder a little bit, though. You have the builder look.
Well, you remember a couple of years ago when it was real bad. Like that wasn't
a builder look. That was like a dirty hippie look that you had going.
Fair enough. Yeah. That's all right. I'll take that. That's good. Mr. Rogers called me. Right. That's great. I'll take that. That's awesome. But no, that's again, a lot of these, when you find yourself stuck in an indecisive position, education will be the key out of it, or hiring a professional to help educate you to get you out of it. The good professionals will not make the decision for you. What they'll do is they'll educate you on the pros and cons of it, give you their opinion, and then you're the final arbiter of the decisions.
Yeah, that's the part I always would share with clients is there is more than enough places that you can get educated just as much as any financial professional to be able to learn everything you want to learn about financial planning. I mean, there's you can go courses and work with a professor like yourself and get your own certificate on certified financial planning and sit through those courses. The problem is determining what information is relevant to you and your situation and sifting through that level of information. And so finding a good professional, what they should do is not completely tell you the right decision to do. They should sift through all that information, share with you the pros and cons of each option, and allow you to make a decision, because financial planning is as much as an art as it is a science. There isn't a very clear distinction, whether it's choosing investment or even putting together. There's certain rules of thumb that we've talked about beforehand, but it's still not completely clear. One top financial planner will put together one plan and another one will do something else, just like it would be with an estate plan or anything else that you would get from a lawyer, or like a doctor would be if he was sitting down with you. And I just went through battling throat cancer, and I went to two of the top hospitals in the country, and they both came up with two different recommendations how to do it. How do we have two different recommendations of it? It's an art and a science.
Right.
So if you realize that you have the bias of status quo and you're saying, I'm sitting here making this decision, I think, because I always have, and I'm not sure I'm making the right decision on it, you want to be able to start to go through, well, why would I buy this investment all over again?
Right.
Or why would I stay with this financial planning strategy over again right now?
Right.
And not just because I did it beforehand.
Yeah, the best question to ask yourself, so if it's an inheritance situation or if it's that default investment in your new 401k at your new job, the question you have to ask yourself is, would I own this if I had to buy it with action instead of with inaction?
That makes complete sense. This also applies, if I think of my own situation, I buy a security I really like, it goes down, and some fundamentals of that security changed. I don't want to sell because I already have a bunch of losses built in. And so now I stay with that security because I'm hoping it'll come back. But I wouldn't want to buy it again because I don't want to buy a stock that I don't completely believe in, but I'm afraid to change it again. Is that status quo bias, or is that a different one?
No, you're dancing on what's called sunk cost now.
Gotcha.
So we'll talk about that one in another
I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, well, another great educational episode on this. And again, I think self-awareness leads to self-development, and your ability to be aware of why you're making a decision is the very beginning of you making better decisions on it. And so be careful of that status quo bias.
Subscribe on your favorite streaming platform if you haven't already, and don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family.